The B-17 flying fortress named Ye Old Pub was dying. Over Bremen, Germany, on December 20, 1943, the American bomber had been torn apart by German fighters and anti-aircraft fire during a bombing raid. The aircraft was barely flying, engines damaged, tail gun destroyed, oxygen system shattered, hydraulics failing. Second Lieutenant Charlie Brown, the 21-year-old pilot, was struggling to keep the bomber airborne. His crew was in worse condition. The tail gunner was dead, slumped in his position. The nose gunner was severely wounded and unconscious. Other crew members were injured, freezing, and terrified. The bomber had fallen behind its formation and was limping alone across German territory, an easy target for any fighter pilot looking for a kill. Brown was flying at treetop level, trying to avoid detection while heading toward England and safety. But the bomber was leaving a trail of fuel and smoking heavily. It was only a matter of time before German fighters found them. At a Luftwaffe airfield near Oldenburg, Oberleutnant Franz Stigler was warming up his Messerschmitt Bf 109 fighter. He was an experienced ace with 27 confirmed kills, just one short of the Knight's Cross, Germany's highest military honor. When ground controllers radioed that an American bomber was nearby, flying low and apparently crippled, Stigler saw an opportunity for his 28th kill. He took off immediately. Within minutes, he spotted the B-17 struggling across the German countryside at less than 1,000 feet altitude. This would be easy. The bomber was defenseless, slow, and heavily damaged. One pass and it would be his. Franz Stigler pulled his Bf 109 alongside the crippled B-17, preparing to attack from the bomber's blind spots. But as he drew closer, what he saw shocked him. Through the massive holes in the bomber's fuselage, Stigler could see inside. He saw the dead tail gunner, frozen in his position. He saw wounded crew members trying to tend to each other. He saw the pilot, barely more than a boy, struggling with the controls, blood on his face. The bomber's guns weren't tracking him. They couldn't. Most were destroyed or the gunners were dead or wounded. This wasn't a combat aircraft anymore. It was a flying ambulance full of wounded men trying desperately to get home. Stigler was close enough to see the terror in the crew members' eyes as they spotted his fighter. They knew they were defenseless. They waited for the bullets that would end their lives. But Stigler didn't fire. Something his commanding officer had told him years ago echoed in his mind: "If I ever see or hear of you shooting at a man in a parachute, I will shoot you myself." His commander had fought in World War I and believed in honor even in war. Shooting a defenseless enemy was murder, not combat. Stigler looked at the crippled bomber and made a decision that would define the rest of his life. These men were defenseless. Shooting them would be murder. Instead of attacking, Stigler pulled his fighter into formation beside the B-17. He would escort them. He would protect them. Inside the B-17, the crew couldn't believe what they were seeing. A German fighter was flying alongside them, not attacking, but escorting. Charlie Brown was confused and terrified. Was this some kind of trick? Were other German fighters positioning to attack? But Stigler made his intentions clear through hand signals. He gestured toward Sweden, suggesting they fly neutral territory where they could land safely. Brown shook his head. Sweden was too far. They'd never make it. Stigler understood. He continued flying escort, positioning his fighter to shield the bomber from ground observers. German anti-aircraft batteries along the coast were preparing to fire on the American bomber when they saw Stigler's Bf 109 flying formation with it. They held their fire, confused by what they were seeing. Why was a German fighter escorting an American bomber instead of shooting it down? Stigler knew he was risking everything. If his superiors discovered what he was doing, he would face a court-martial and likely execution. The Luftwaffe in late 1943 was desperate and brutal. Pilots who showed mercy to the enemy were considered traitors. But Stigler couldn't bring himself to shoot defenseless men. As they approached the North Sea, Stigler knew he had to turn back. He couldn't escort them to England, he'd be shot down or captured. He pulled alongside the B-17 one final time, made eye contact with Charlie Brown, and saluted. Then he peeled away and headed back to Germany. Charlie Brown and his crew stared in disbelief as the German fighter disappeared. Charlie Brown somehow got the crippled B-17 across the North Sea and crash-landed in England. The bomber was so damaged that it was scrapped, it would never fly again. Investigators counted over 400 flak and bullet holes. It was a miracle anyone had survived. When Brown reported what happened, that a German fighter had escorted them instead of shooting them down, his commanding officers didn't believe him. Or rather, they believed him but ordered him never to speak about it. The story was classified. Why? Because it humanized the enemy. In December 1943, the strategic bombing campaign was intensifying. Allied command needed bomber crews to see German fighter pilots as ruthless killers, not as honorable warriors capable of mercy. A story about a German pilot showing compassion would undermine that narrative. Brown was told that if he spoke about the incident, he could face charges for not taking evasive action or for some other invented violation. The message was clear: keep quiet. So Brown stayed silent. For decades, he told no one about the German pilot who saved his life. Meanwhile, back in Germany, Franz Stigler also kept silent. He never reported the encounter. He never claimed the kill, though he easily could have lied about shooting down the bomber. He knew that if the truth emerged, he would be executed for treason. So Stigler continued flying missions, surviving the war, and carrying the secret of that December day when he chose mercy over murder. After the war, Charlie Brown returned to America and tried to build a normal life. He attended college, got married, started a family, and worked as a diplomat and later in the oil and gas industry. But he never forgot the German pilot. The memory haunted him, in a good way. That pilot had saved his life and the lives of his crew. Brown wanted to find him, to thank him, to understand why he had shown mercy. But how do you find one German pilot among millions who fought in the war? Franz Stigler, meanwhile, had immigrated to Canada after the war. Like many German veterans, he wanted to escape the ruins of Germany and start fresh. He became a successful businessman in Vancouver. He married, had a family, and built a good life. But he also never forgot that December day over Germany. Sometimes, he would think about the young American pilot he had escorted. Had he made it home? Had he survived the war? Stigler had no way of knowing. For 40 years, both men lived their separate lives, each carrying the memory of a brief encounter over war-torn Germany. Brown would occasionally think about trying to find the German pilot, but it seemed impossible. Stigler never spoke about the incident, even to his family. The secret remained buried. Until 1986, when Charlie Brown decided he had to try. He was getting older. If he was going to find the German pilot, it had to be now. He placed an ad in a newsletter for former German fighter pilots. Charlie Brown's ad in the former Luftwaffe pilots newsletter was simple: I am looking for a German pilot who escorted a badly damaged B-17 over Germany on December 20, 1943. I was the pilot of that aircraft and would like to make contact. He provided details about the encounter, the location, the damage to his aircraft, the hand signals, the salute. Then he waited. For months, nothing. Brown began to think the pilot was probably dead. After all, Luftwaffe casualties were high, especially in the war's final years. The pilot might have been shot down in a subsequent mission. Or died in the chaos of Germany's collapse. But then, in 1990, Brown received a letter from Canada. It was from Franz Stigler. The letter began, I am the pilot you are looking for. Stigler explained that he had seen the ad and immediately recognized the incident. He had kept silent for 47 years, but now he felt he could finally speak. He was 80 years old, living in Vancouver, and wanted to meet the American pilot he had saved. Brown was overwhelmed. The pilot was alive. After 47 years, he could finally thank the man who saved his life. They arranged to meet. In 1990, Charlie Brown flew to Vancouver to meet Franz Stigler face-to-face for the first time since that day in 1943. The reunion was emotional beyond words. Two old men, former enemies, embracing as brothers. Stigler's first words were, "I didn't shoot you down because I couldn't. You were already dead." When Charlie Brown and Franz Stigler met in Vancouver in 1990, both were in their 70s. Nearly half a century had passed since that December day over Germany. Brown brought photographs of his damaged B-17 and his crew. Stigler brought his logbook and his memories. They spent hours reconstructing the encounter, filling in details that only the two of them knew. Brown learned why Stigler didn't shoot. Stigler explained his commander's words about honor, about not shooting defenseless men. He explained that looking into the bomber and seeing wounded, dying men, he couldn't pull the trigger. "You were in a parachute," Stigler said, referring to the old prohibition against shooting men in parachutes. "Your plane was a parachute. You were defenseless." Stigler learned what happened after he turned back. Brown described the desperate flight across the North Sea, the crash landing in England, the interrogation about the German escort, the order to keep silent. He showed Stigler photos of his crew, the men Stigler had saved. Not just Brown, but all of them owed their lives to Stigler's decision. The two men discovered they had much in common beyond that one encounter. Both had struggled with the morality of war. Both had kept secrets for decades. Both had tried to live honorable lives after experiencing the horror of combat. They became close friends. For the remaining years of their lives, they spoke regularly, visited each other, and appeared together at veterans' events. They co-authored a book about their experience. They became symbols of reconciliation and the possibility of honor even in war. Franz Stigler's decision to escort rather than shoot the B-17 was extraordinary because of what he risked. In December 1943, Germany was losing the war but still fighting fanatically. The Luftwaffe was desperate. Every Allied bomber that reached German cities dropped tons of explosives on civilian targets. Bomber crews were not seen as honorable enemies but as terror bombers targeting women and children. German propaganda dehumanized Allied air crews. Fighter pilots who showed them mercy were considered traitors. The penalty for such treason was execution. Stigler knew all this. He knew that if anyone discovered what he had done, he would face a court-martial. His family might suffer reprisals. His career would end in disgrace and death. So why did he do it? Stigler's explanation was rooted in his understanding of honor. He had been taught by his first commander, Gustav Rodel, that there were rules even in war. You fought the enemy, but you didn't murder them when they were defenseless. Shooting the B-17 would have been murder, not combat. Stigler was also influenced by his Catholic faith. He saw mercy as a moral imperative. These men in the bomber were human beings, not just enemies. They were wounded, terrified, and trying to survive, just like German soldiers in similar situations would be. Would Stigler want Allied pilots to show mercy to defenseless Germans? Yes. So how could he do less? Honor required consistency. Finally, Stigler believed that becoming a murderer would destroy him spiritually. Killing in combat was one thing. Executing defenseless men was another. He chose to remain true to his principles, whatever the cost. For the surviving crew members of Ye Old Pub, the German escort was a miracle they struggled to understand. Some never knew it happened, they were unconscious or too focused on survival. Others saw the Bf-109 flying alongside and assumed they were about to die. When the German fighter didn't attack, they were confused. When it escorted them, they were stunned. After landing in England, several crew members were hospitalized with severe wounds. The tail gunner was buried in an American military cemetery. Those who survived the war went home carrying physical and psychological scars. For years, they couldn't talk about the German escort. Military orders forbade it. When Charlie Brown finally found Stigler in 1990 and the story became public, the surviving crew members were able to speak freely for the first time. Their reactions varied. Some wept with gratitude, finally able to thank the man who saved them. Others struggled with complex emotions. This German pilot had also spent years shooting down Allied bombers. How many American airmen had he killed in his 27 confirmed victories? Stigler acknowledged this moral complexity. He had been a warrior doing his duty. He had killed enemy airmen in combat. But he drew a line at murder. The surviving crew understood this distinction. They could honor Stigler's mercy while acknowledging the reality of war. At veteran reunions, several crew members met Stigler and thanked him personally. These reunions were emotional, old men crying, embracing, forgiving. The war had been over for decades, but these moments of reconciliation healed wounds that had never fully closed. When Charlie Brown first reported the German escort in 1943, why did Allied command order him to stay silent? The reasons were both psychological and strategic. First, Allied bomber crews faced horrific casualties. In 1943–44, the odds of surviving a full tour of 25 missions were less than 25%. Crews needed to believe they were fighting evil enemies who would show no mercy. This mental framework made it easier to face death daily. A story about a compassionate German pilot undermined that narrative. If German pilots were honorable, if they showed mercy, if they were human, then bombing their cities became morally complicated. Allied command wanted bomber crews to see Germans as the enemy, period. Second, the story could be seen as Allied weakness. Why had the German pilot not shot them down? Because the bomber was so damaged it wasn't worth the ammunition. That made Allied bombers look vulnerable. Better to suppress the story. Third, there were propaganda concerns. German propaganda constantly claimed that Allied bomber crews were terror bombers targeting civilians. An American crew admitting they were shown mercy by a German pilot might be twisted into propaganda. Even our pilots know these Americans don't deserve to die, they're not soldiers, just victims of their commanders. Finally, there was the simple fact that the military doesn't like stories it can't control. The German escort was anomalous, unpredictable, and didn't fit any standard narrative. Easier to classify it and forget about it. These same considerations kept the story buried for decades after the war. Only in the 1990s, when both men were elderly and the Cold War had ended, did the story finally emerge publicly. Franz Stigler's decision highlights an important aspect of warfare that's often forgotten. Even in total war, some combatants maintained codes of honor. These weren't official rules but personal ethics that some warriors refused to violate. The prohibition against shooting men in parachutes was one such rule. Though not always followed, many pilots on both sides considered it dishonorable to shoot a pilot who had bailed out. The pilot was defenseless and posed no threat. Killing him was murder, not combat. Stigler extended this logic to the crippled B-17. The bomber was effectively a parachute, it couldn't fight back, couldn't complete its mission, was just trying to survive. Shooting it would be like shooting a man in a parachute. Other examples of combat honor existed throughout the war. Erwin Rommel refused to execute captured commandos despite Hitler's direct orders. British and German soldiers in North Africa sometimes showed respect for wounded enemies. There are documented cases of both sides allowing medical aircraft to operate unmolested. But these examples were exceptions, not the rule. Total war, particularly on the Eastern Front and in the strategic bombing campaign, often eliminated such niceties. Civilians were targeted. POWs were massacred. Wounded were killed. The fact that Stigler maintained his code of honor in December 1943, when Germany was losing and desperation was increasing, makes his decision more remarkable. He could have justified shooting the B-17. The bomber had just participated in a raid that killed German civilians. His superiors would have praised him. He would have earned his Knight's Cross. But honor meant more to him than medals or advancement. That choice, putting principle above pragmatism, is why his story resonates decades later. When Franz Stigler chose not to shoot down Ye Old Pub, he saved 10 lives that day. But the ripple effects extended far beyond those 10 men. Charlie Brown went on to have a family. His children and grandchildren exist because Stigler showed mercy. The same is true for other crew members who survived. They married, had children, built careers, touched countless lives. One simple decision by Stigler created a cascade of life and possibility that extends to the present day. How many descendants of that B-17 crew exist today? Dozens, probably hundreds when you count children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. All of them owe their existence indirectly to Stigler's decision not to fire. This ripple effect works in the opposite direction too. Every time Stigler shot down an Allied bomber before or after December 20, 1943, he ended lives and prevented all the descendants those airmen would have had. This is the terrible arithmetic of war: every death prevents entire family trees from existing. Stigler understood this in 1943, which is partly why he couldn't shoot the defenseless bomber. He could imagine the families waiting for those men to come home. Killing them would destroy not just 10 lives but dozens more through grief and loss. After their reunion, Brown and Stigler spoke often about this. Brown would tell Stigler about his children and grandchildren. "You gave me all of this," he would say. Stigler would reply, "I just couldn't take it away." The two men also discussed the bomber crews Stigler had shot down, the lives he had ended in combat. This was painful but necessary. Reconciliation required acknowledging the full reality of war, not just the merciful moments. Both men came to peace with the past by recognizing that war creates impossible moral situations, but individuals can still choose honor even when surrounded by horror. In 1991, shortly after their reunion, Charlie Brown and Franz Stigler decided to tell their story publicly. They collaborated with author Adam Makos on a book titled A Higher Call, an incredible true story of combat and chivalry in the war-torn skies of World War II. The book, published in 2012, became an international bestseller. It introduced their story to millions who had never heard of the incident. Reviews praised it as a reminder that humanity can survive even in war's worst circumstances. Brown and Stigler appeared together at numerous events, veteran reunions, schools, military academies. They spoke to young people about honor, mercy, and the choices individuals make even when institutions demand something different. At military academies, their story became a case study in ethics. Cadets debated Stigler's decision: was he right to disobey orders? Did he betray his duty? Or did he exemplify a higher duty to basic humanity? The debates revealed that there are no easy answers. War creates situations where every choice involves moral compromise. Stigler's decision was remarkable precisely because it was difficult and risky. The story also became important in German-American reconciliation efforts. It showed that not all German soldiers were Nazis, that honor existed on both sides, and that former enemies could become friends. Both men received numerous awards and honors. They were invited to speak at the Air Force Academy, at veteran reunions, at peace conferences. They became symbols of reconciliation and the possibility of maintaining humanity even in inhumane circumstances. Stigler died in 2008 at age 92. Brown died in 2008 at age 87, just 7 months after Stigler. They had been close friends for 18 years after being unknown to each other for 47. Their families remain close to this day. The story of Stigler and Brown poses a question for everyone who hears it: what would you have done? If you were Franz Stigler on December 20, 1943, would you have shot down the bomber or escorted it to safety? Consider the pressures Stigler faced. He was 1 kill away from receiving the Knight's Cross, Germany's highest military honor. That medal would bring recognition, advancement, and glory. His family would be proud. His squadron would celebrate. Shooting down the defenseless bomber would have been easy, safe, and rewarded. No one would have questioned it. Allied bombers had killed thousands of German civilians. This particular crew had just participated in a raid on Bremen. From a patriotic perspective, destroying them was not just justified but necessary. Every bomber that survived would return to bomb Germany again. Letting them go meant more German deaths. If Stigler's superiors discovered he had let an enemy bomber escape, he would be court-martialed and likely executed. The SS was ruthless about enforcing loyalty, and showing mercy to the enemy was considered treason. Stigler risked everything by not shooting. Yet Stigler chose mercy. He followed a code of honor that said defenseless enemies should not be murdered. He listened to his conscience instead of his orders. He valued human life over military advantage. Would you have done the same? It's easy to say yes from the safety of peacetime. But in the moment, with adrenaline pumping, with orders and duty and survival instincts all pushing you to shoot, would you really have shown mercy? Stigler's story is powerful because we can't be certain we would have made the same choice. Most people, in his position, probably would have shot down the bomber. The fact that he didn't makes him exceptional. The story of Franz Stigler and Charlie Brown endures because it represents something essential about humanity. Even in war's darkest moments, individuals can choose mercy over cruelty, honor over expedience, conscience over orders. Stigler's decision on December 20, 1943, could have remained unknown forever. He could have died with his secret. Brown could have died without ever finding him. But because both men lived long enough to meet, to tell their story, to share it with the world, we have a powerful reminder of what's possible. The title of their book, A Higher Call, refers to Stigler's belief that he answered a call higher than military duty. He answered the call of basic humanity, of moral law that transcends national loyalties or wartime necessity. This idea, that individuals have responsibilities beyond following orders, is not new. The Nuremberg trials established that just following orders is not a defense for atrocities. But Stigler's story illustrates the positive version of that principle. Individuals can choose honor even when orders permit or encourage dishonorable acts. For military professionals, the story is a case study in ethical leadership and decision-making under pressure. For civilians, it's a reminder that enemies are human beings, that reconciliation is possible, and that the choices we make in extreme circumstances define who we are. For veterans, it's validation that honor and mercy matter even in war. For young people, it's an example of moral courage, doing the right thing despite risk and pressure to do otherwise. Franz Stigler and Charlie Brown lived full lives after the war. They built families, succeeded professionally, and contributed to their communities. But their defining moment came on a winter day over Germany when one man chose not to pull the trigger. That choice saved 10 lives immediately and created ripples that continue to this day through descendants, through the story's influence, through the reminder that humanity can survive even in humanity's darkest hours. In the end, Stigler didn't just save Brown's life. He saved his own soul. By refusing to become a murderer, he remained true to himself. And by finally sharing their story, both men gave the world a gift, proof that even in total war, honor is possible. That's their legacy. That's why we remember. That's why their story matters.